I'm going to lay out some facts. I think we can all agree that we're on an unsustainable trajectory. I'll repeat a few things that Mary said, but just the common core points that we need to have to launch our discussion for the day. We have now 805 million undernourished people in the world. Now that's down from 925 million in 2010. So it shows good progress toward our millennium goal, but we can hardly call that good news, right? 805 million people still. We have this crazy paradox of obesity and hunger. It coexists across the globe, with the common root being lack of access to good, healthy food. The Food Agricultural Organization, the United Nations, says that the world currently produces enough food in the aggregate for all the people on Earth, but we have profound disparities. Nearly a fourth of the world's land is used for food production. That's almost the entire quarter that's suitable for cultivation. According to UNEP, cattle occupy 25% of that land, and another 25% is used for feed, animal feed. Looking forward, we know we have 2 billion more people that we'll have to feed by 2050 if current population growth continues as expected. Most of this growth in population will reside in the developing world, with 96% of all population growth occurring in low-income countries. Climate change is here. As Secretary Clinton, I thought, spoke very well to this point this week, she called it, "The science of climate change is unforgiving." And for our farmers out in the western part of the country, they've had a really, really tough time. And I find those words really do justice to the situation they're facing. Some predict yields will be reduced by as much as a third in certain areas of the world. So those are sort of the facts that we confront. So for all these reasons, I think it's important that we're having this discussion today. And I want to thank the Washington Post and Mary for bringing us together. I know I'm a sorry substitute for Administrator Raj Shah, who has been a forceful leader for advancing global food security, but he was unable to join, and so I'm going to do my best. And what I want to do is present 6 brief observations to help seed our discussion today. First, the role of women and girls. So if any of you have been in an audience that I've spoken to in the last year and a half, you know that I'm obsessed by this point. And part of it is because we have compelling reports that come from both the Food Bank and the United Nations that say if women around the world had the same access to education, resources, and leadership roles as men, world food production would increase by 30%, which is the equivalent of feeding 150 million people. Now, in the United States, we are now 1 million women principal farm operators, and there is a growth trend there. Young women are very interested in getting back to the land and getting their hands in the soil in this country. That's sort of new for us. But the reality is, around the globe, our farmers are women. And their empowerment is going to make a big, big difference. So as we tackle the question about how to feed the world in 2050, we have to, at the same time, tackle the question, how do we empower the women of the world to help us meet that challenge? I also want to mention that Krista Harden, who took my role as Deputy Secretary, has been doing a great job leading this discussion and elevating the role of women in agriculture. My second point to seed our discussion, I want to preface this with a statement. My friends know that my favorite vegetable is parsnips, prepared any way, chased by a big, very rare steak, and preceded with a Boodle's martini, very dry, straight up with a twist. So I am not picture perfect for healthy food all days, every days, but I think we have to talk about meat and consumption patterns. World meat and dairy consumption doubled between 1950 and 2009. If trends continue, consumption will increase, by some estimates, by a factor of 4 by 2050. In the northeast of the country where I'm from, there's an article that's soon to come out by a friend of mine at Tufts that says that 56% of the land in the northeast, where the perception is, it's mixed fruits and vegetables. You probably enjoyed some of our cranberries over Thanksgiving from Massachusetts. 56% of the land in the Northeast is either in livestock or devoted to feed for livestock. Projections of population growth, increasing urbanization, and increasing income in the developing world all point to increased consumption of animal products, including fish. We have to confront these consumption patterns. We currently have dietary guidelines for Americans Advisory Committee, who has for the first time in subcommittee on sustainability, and some people feel this is mission creep. I think it's central. It's central to food security, confronting some of these issues. We want to address resource-intensive consumption in a way that does not harm our farmers and our ranchers. In order to do this, we need to have honest discussions, we need to be planning, we need to have helpful policy interventions so everyone is made whole. Third thought for the discussion of the day, and it's on our agenda later on, and I'm very happy for that: food loss and waste. FAO estimates that 1/3 of all food produced for human consumption ends up as food loss or waste. Now, there are very different reasons and different realities for this depending upon where you look in the globe. There's 40% that's wasted in the US, that same 40% for sub-Saharan Africa. Obviously, very different situations, very different things that we're talking about. But it's an incredibly important issue. Food waste in landfills is a significant source of methane emissions. The use of land, soils, water, energy to produce food that is not ultimately consumed is substantial. Post-harvest losses in small-scale fisheries, the highest of all in commodities. So this is an important issue that we need to tackle in our discussion today. I'm very pleased that we'll be hearing from my former boss, Secretary Tom Vilsack, who's really been a forceful leader taking on this issue front and center. Fourth issue, climate. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I think John Podesta is doing a telecast later today. There's a lot of stuff going on this very week on climate. And with my friends on the farms in this country facing drought and knowing the statistics on consumptive water use in agriculture, which is a stunning statistic, we need to think about this. And we need to think about the role of technology. I mean, I, for one, am just waiting for those promised drought-resistant crops that are going to make agriculture a less thirsty enterprise. And I'm hoping that we learn much more about the soil. I always think about Leonardo da Vinci. His words seem still true today. We know more about the celestial planets overhead than the soil beneath our feet. There's so much more that we need to tackle on soil, and soil sequestration is a big part of the answer moving forward. I think there's a lot of opportunity to delve into those issues. My fifth issue, diversity. So my mom passed away the week before my confirmation hearing, and I always, all of us, when you lose a parent, you always wish that they were around with that sage advice, and you wish you listened to them more when they were about gnawing at your ear. But my mom used to say, the older I live, the less I know. I was like, what does that mean? And now I really, really get it, because this issue that is on our agenda today, it's a really complicated issue. And the more I live, the more I understand what little I know. These issues require a diversity of interventions, a diversity of thought, a diversity of techniques, of technology, of seed, of people. And I just want to say that diversity for me is one of the highest values. If you had the opportunity to follow US politics of late, you know that this embracing of diversity of thought is no longer the norm. And I just noted one example this week, and it's an Intelligence Squared debate, an NGO, and the question before the debaters, genetically modify food, for or against? For or against? It reminds me of the time when I was a professor at Tufts University and I convened a symposium on agricultural biotechnology. And I gave a talk using government data saying that we need to invest more money in risk assessment research as it related to biotechnology. And one of the developers, a man who I had not met before but had worshiped from afar, stood up in the front row. It was one of the developers of Golden Rice. And he stood up in the front row and he pointed at me in front of all my new colleagues. I was a brand new assistant professor. He said, "It's people like you who cause 10,000 children a day to die." This conversation is so, as the kids would say, so yesterday. I mean, how can we mature the conversation that we can really grapple with the issues that we need to be talking about? It distresses me. It distresses me that you either have to be for or against. And I would just say, over the course of our day, if we can just put the ideological rhetoric aside and try to have intelligent discourse, I think we would all be better for it. Fifth and last point, and then Mary can have her way with me. I am going to quote one of my longtime heroes who left us a couple of years ago, and that's Senator George McGovern. And I had the great opportunity, I was invited by Ambassador David Lane to give our annual global food security talk at FAO. It's the George McGovern Lecture. And I used this quote in my talk. And George McGovern said, "Every informed person I have worked with in Rome, in Washington, and in South Dakota tells me that there's enough food in the world and enough productive potential to end humanity's hunger. Do we have the political and moral will?" So, as we move to improve agricultural production and address the 805 million who live with hunger, I'd argue there's room for organic, there's room for regional agriculture, there's room for urban farms that we can't even imagine, vertical farms. I'm a big fan of milking robots. I think we're going to see a lot of exciting changes on the horizon. I think there's room for all kinds of things to imagine, and that there's not just one way to address global food security. It's not just about improving production. It's dealing with political issues. It's dealing with distribution. It's dealing with the role of women and girls. Indeed, choosing one way rather than a diversity of approaches is ill-advised.
Let me just ask you a small question that is actually a big question that you've spent a lot of time on, about empowering women around the world. How do you begin that in agriculture?
In agriculture, well, certainly it's about education, and what we've done with the school lunch program in developing countries has been really important for girls to be able to stay in school because they get food and they get to bring food home to their families. So these kind of interventions are really important. But it's really complicated. It has to do with land tenure. I mean, there are a lot of different...
Abroad, that even women can't even inherit
that's
land
right,
abroad.
That's right.
In many parts of the world, just simply because you're a woman, you don't get the land.
That's right. So there's all kinds of legal systems that need to be tackled. I just think that it needs to be in our international discussions. It needs to be a higher agenda item for us.
And here at home, we have our own issues too. And what would you say, figuratively, is the low-hanging fruit? Something that we can start on right away that will help us have a more equitable system.
Well, I think we need to recognize that we have, nearly 49 million people in this country who are food insecure, that we have a SNAP program for a reason that helps farmers, that helps the economy, and not continue this war on poor people. I don't think that helps agriculture. I don't think it helps us in international standing when we have discussions, as I just had in Rome this past month, about right to food. There's no country in the world that's better on right to food than the US, actually, because we have such an important and wonderful nutrition safety net. But I think that, again, we are getting the politicians all riled up. We're seeing them all riled up on the Hill with sharpening the budget knives. And I just want to underscore the importance of those programs.
And the SNAP program, of course, is the food stamp program that you think is critical, absolutely. And what is the issue? Why is it so divisive? What do you think is at the heart? Is it just not lack of understanding about how much it's needed?
It's hard for me to know, because lack of understanding, there's not a community in this country that escapes hunger. And I grew up in a rural area, and in some ways the hunger there was harder to see, because it wasn't, you couldn't just come in with your news cameras and see it, and people live lives of quiet desperation. And even with the incredible outreach the Obama administration has done to reach eligible people, we know that still about 35% of elderly who are eligible to receive SNAP benefits do so. And part of it is their depression era, pride, maybe they're shuttered away in places where they don't have access to the services. But we need to deal with these issues. I think we should just stop the battling over SNAP and move on. We've got a lot of challenges. That's an important program. It's a pillar of our economy, and people really need it. And most of the people who get SNAP benefits, it's a step in raising their children and getting their families in a place where they can be successful.
And it was Abraham Lincoln that established the Department of Agriculture.
The People's Department.
And he called it the People's Department. And today, about 1% of Americans are directly connected to the farm. What is that huge disconnection from most people? What is the importance or significance of that, do you think?
It's huge, and that was part of the reason why we launched the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food initiative. It's very much identified with building local regional food systems, yes, but it was largely as well about having a national conversation, an overdue conversation about who grows our food, how it was grown, how important it is. I did a college tour when I was deputy secretary. I went to about 40 different colleges across the country, and I'd ask questions with eye clickers, and people could pick the answer. How long does a chicken last before it's your dinner? And you'd be surprised how many people would say 2 years, when actually the answer, is this crowd likely knows, is about 6 weeks. And so there's this
do you
lack
have any
of
other
literacy.
facts that you?
Well, I would love to. I always put up the pie chart of USDA's budget, or I'd ask, where does most of USDA resources go to? And I'd give them 4 or 5 answers, and people always chose farm subsidies. And in fact, of course, the answer is nutrition assistance. 2/3 plus of the USDA's budget goes to nutrition assistance, and that was a shocker. But so it was all about USDA, and it was also about ag production. But we need to lift the literacy around agriculture and food production if we're going to have the kind of political discourse we need to move forward in the face of some really challenging times.